finish the meeting, simply because broadcasting live was too difficult. So we are here. So welcome everybody, and again welcome to Colin, who's taken over, as I was reminded earlier, from Dan Humphries as one of our district and borough reps. So welcome back formally to the board, Colin. It's really good to see you.
Okay.
We have apologies from John Housel, and as I said, Daniel Rees has sent his apologies this morning. Are there any others that we've had?
Yeah, we've got Matt Furness. Matt Furness is at the Heathrow board and sends his apologies. Okay,
thank you. We'll record that. Thank you. And Emily Bailey's here today, joined us at the TFSE as new project manager, and Emily will be covering Jasmine's maternity leave. So well done and welcome. If I could just remind you, I don't think I need to, if we are not speaking, if we take the microphones off, it does give a bit more continuity to the rest of the meeting. And as I said, it is being recorded and will be uploaded publicly to YouTube after the event. So we'll move on to agenda item 2, which is the minutes from the previous meeting. You have the minutes that have been circulated. So are they a true record of the meeting held on the 18th of October? I take no answer as a yes. Yeah. Thank you. And the board meetings will be put. The minutes will be put on the website. There was only one action, which was 12.6, which was Mark Vallely was going to catch up separately with Dan with regard to discuss the future mobility work, and I think that's happened or happening. So we come to declarations of interest. Are there any declarations that any members wish to make in regards to anything that's on today's agenda? No one notifying? Okay. So there are no public statements being made for this morning's meeting. So we'll move on to agenda item 5, which is the future role and responsibility of TFSE. And Rupert, I'm going to ask you to introduce, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So the board will recall us setting out thinking back in January last year about the future roles and responsibilities as we started to develop the SIP to put us in the best possible place to turn that ambitious document into a reality. So in essence, this is about ensuring we've got the right governance and the right staff structure and capabilities in place. And in terms of governance, members will be interested to know that a number of STBs that followed behind us adopted the governance approach that we've taken. But now is the time, as we move into that SIP, to start to think about what next. So the board will recall we commissioned Arup, and you'll also probably recall, seems a while ago now, back in the end of the summer, we had a board workshop to allow us to think about the types of roles, responsibilities and governance arrangements that we might want. The review looked at other subnational transport bodies and similar bodies to sort of benchmark and understand how different organisations set their governance arrangements and staffing structures and capability. And the board will recall that Arup used what they called a transport value chain approach to try and help us understand, where is the place in which we can bring about the most influence, and what roles should we play. There was a focus on that sort of national government decision making, strategy, policy and prioritisation, planning and delivery, and operations and maintenance. And of course, from an operations and maintenance perspective, TFSE plays no role as such. And as you go up that chain, when you're thinking about strategy and prioritisation and policy influence and planning, those are predominantly where those roles, or the roles for subnational transport bodies, land. Arup identified a number of areas of focus, and particularly in relation to capability and capacity. So that around regional data and modelling and analytics. So how do you generate the evidence base that helps you inform interventions? The SIP itself and the implementation of the SIP, and then two important thematic strands around future mobility and freight. The ARUP report and the paper in front of you puts together some proposals to strengthen both that capability and capacity. And I would stress the point that clearly that is subject to future funding settlements, and then governance. And then in relation to governance, there's a recommendation in the paper that we re-establish the governance subgroup later this year to review the constitution and governance arrangements to make sure that they still remain fit for purpose. Any changes that they recommend will come in front of the board as we set ourselves ready for the delivery of that implementation of the SIP. So, Chairman, the paper in front of you and lengthy accompanying document has a series of recommendations about noting the findings of the review, agreeing the objectives, noting the capability requirements, and in essence establishing the governance subgroup. So, Chairman, I'm happy to stop there and take any questions if required.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments for Rupert? Tony.
Yeah, Keith. Yeah, thanks for that, Rupert. Couple of points. Turning to paragraph 3.16 in the report on page 17. It's the proposal to delegate to your lead officer, yourself, in consultation with Keith, what's described in the previous sentence as a small managed expansion of the TFSE team to increase capacity in these three areas of focus, the ones that are mentioned a bit earlier. I'm not too sure quite what the implications of that are in terms of size and how that sits in terms of the following paragraph, because there's the further organisation development exercise undertaken, and there's also the reference to longer term funding there. But a recommendation not to take forward that review. So I'm a bit confused as to where those two sit. Sorry, let me just get rid of that. So that was the first question. And then the other thing relates to the ARUP report itself. And towards the end of it, I'm just fumble through my papers, on page 38. And clearly this is something that would be picked up by the governance subcommittee, governance group. But I'm a bit concerned where it says future decision making. There is a reference to a desire for, quotes, a more dynamic decision making with higher frequency of outputs would benefit from an expanded scheme of delegations. So I detect here a race to grow and at the same time delegate. And for a new organisation, I think that's dangerous. And I would, now this is something, if I participate in the governance structure, would want to look at in more detail, but I wouldn't want us today or officers to assume that we're signing off on all the minutiae in the ARUP report, because of course they do rightly refer under the following page 40 about the implications of the levelling up white paper, if and when we ever see it, quite what our role is as subnational transport bodies, whether there's any devolution, and how we sit within that agenda. And clearly that has resource implications potentially, as well as a move to statutory status. So I suppose what I'm signalling is a concern that we don't race ahead on the basis of assuming too much, and I would not want to be accused of signing off on an expansion of TFSE resources at a time when there are quite a few uncertainties. I appreciate that a lot of this is linked to government funding, and that is welcome. But it is still something that I think we as a board need to maintain a clear view of and control over. And whilst I have full confidence in both Rupert and Keith, delegating stuff at this stage may lead us as individual members to be criticised by our own authorities. So there's a balance here to be struck. So those, and I fully support re-establishing the governance subgroup, which I think could play a useful function in taking forward some of this debate. And I would signal my willingness to participate in that, if not chair it again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, and I'm sure Rupert will come to the formula, but from my perspective, one of the things I think we can credit ourselves with is being a board that's open and transparent and makes the decisions, and I'm sure with what's in the paper, anything less than that is not what's desired. I mean, there are day-to-day running issues that should be delegated, and rightly so. But decisions on staff and fundings is usually come to the board, and it is almost certainly determined by what resources we've got from government, because we made another clear decision not to raise the contributions from constituent authorities earlier. Rupert, do you want to comment before I come to Martin?
Yeah, thanks, Keith. I mean, Tony, you're absolutely right in terms of the comprehensive spending review. So you'll remember we submitted a proposal to government in advance of the CSR that we are waiting to hear the outcomes on. So a lot of the resource and capability is linked to the CSR. So we put in that document, we identified some roles and capability shortfalls that, should we get the funding, that's something that we would want to make sure we've got the right people for. The bit in paragraph 3.17, I mean, we're not going to take that forward at the moment. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's conditioned on the outcome of the spending review, and we'll touch upon it later in the finance paper, but the DfT have recently awarded us 600,000 across a range of activities, both and some of that's linked with Economic Heartland and Transport East. And there are capability issues for us to enable us to effectively deliver some of this stuff. So the CSR set that out, and we would only increase our numbers, and we're talking 2-3 people potentially, in the event that that CSR gave us the right outcome. And I'm sure the DfT will touch upon that a bit later on. In terms of scheme of delegation, if you like, this isn't. We're absolutely crystal clear that matters of policy and other matters that the board need to decide on, they need to decide upon. This is mainly around where the small items of expenditure that a board have agreed a principal, policy decision on, that there's an appropriate scheme of delegation in place that we all have in our respective authorities to incur expenditure. It's that sort of stuff, and I think the establishment of the governance group is an ideal opportunity to make sure that you're comfortable as a board with whatever, or that governance group recommends to the board, a degree of comfort with whatever is proposed in terms of those future governance arrangements.
Thank you, Rupert. Come to Martin then, Alan.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, just linking a couple of themes together, really, in terms of timing, and clearly a lot of the items on the agenda are linked today, but so I don't want to get ahead too much. But we talked earlier in the briefing about the SIP, and from my perspective, it's important not only to talk about the what, but to talk about the how. To get support for a strong and credible SIP, which support everything we've heard so far, to be frank. And I suppose that my question is around the timing. Your governance review talking about in the summer, but that's going to help determine the capabilities of TFSE, the issues beyond the finance that we need to deliver on the package that the SIP is seeking. And I just wonder if I'm not suggesting we get bogged down in detail on that now of timing and scheduling, but just occurs to me that it may be looking like we'll be a bit late to the table with our review of governance compared to the timing and our ambitions for the timing of the SIP, if unless we've got some high-level principles that we feel we can agree on around in March at the March board meeting, for example, to take forward, because otherwise I'm not yet clear, and maybe it's just that I'm missing it, how we're saying we'll be able to deliver on some of those ambitions within the SIP.
Do you want to comment, Rupert, or?
Oh, and I think so it's exactly why we want the governance group to have a look at some of the thinking that we're beginning to set out. The SIP is a 30-year investment plan. The world, as we know, is evolving. We're waiting for CSR outcome, waiting to hear the outcome of levelling up. We've got the work that the GBR transition team are doing, and the consultation on the WISP. We've got Highways England and the RIS, and so there's lots of movement coming in. And I think someone touched on it. Tony might have touched on BSIPs and other bits and bobs that are flying around. And it's much like I mentioned at the start. This is about us ensuring we are in the right place to influence government policy, and frankly shape policy with government. That is crucial. And then how we get into that policy and prioritisation. So you'll hear from Sarah later on about the DFT's requirements for STBs to prioritise major road network investment again. So it's making sure that we've got the capability, particularly as Arup mentioned, around things like analytical work, data and modelling, so that you've got the right evidence base that when you come to deliver some of these things within the SIP, it's got the traction and evidence that supports investment.
And I think, Rupert, just to finish off on the timing, I mean, there's no point if the board agree in a moment that we do re-establish the governance committee that can't be put in train. So it's there if we need to draw on it sooner than the summer. So I think that's there's no reason why we can't do that. So
thanks, Keith. I think that's what I was driving at, really. That the sooner the better if it's going to help inform the how.
Yeah, no, we can do that. Alan.
Yes, thank you, Keith. I do agree with the governance proposal. That's fine. I'd share Tony's comments about delegation. I think Rupert's dealt with that in his response quite well. He also mentioned increase of resources, and I think we have to take great care with that and not increase resources over and above what we absolutely need, because although we've got a very useful additional funding, what we don't yet have any sign of is sustainable year-on-year funding. We don't have that, so we just need to take care we don't get ourselves in a pickle with a whole cohort of staff and no money to pay them with. So we just need to be aware of that.
No, I think it's a very fair point, and I'm sure we are there with that. But I'm sure Rupert can comment if he wants to.
Keith, I can just to say that we wouldn't be recruiting anybody unless we don't have the money to do so. The questions about sustainability, Alan, are absolutely spot on. So if we were to recruit people on, there is, as you know, we carry a reserve for winding up or redundancy and stuff like that. It's really important that if we do recruit people, it's a bit of a moving feast, that you've got the capacity to sustainably deal with situations that might arise.
Yeah. Thank you. Rob, welcome.
Yeah, hi Keith, thank you. It was just a couple of points that Tony mentioned, and Martin, certainly from Tony's point of view, just to remember that as authorities, we all have our processes and procedures to go through, and it was just picking up on that to make sure that lines up with our timings. Sometimes it doesn't always line up, but just to make sure that we need to be given that space to go through our cabinet and processes, everything else we have to do. And that was more in terms of what Tony was saying about the financing and where we are, and I know that's going to be delayed from a minute, that Rupert has already said that. But very much interested what Martin was saying about the governance subgroup. because where we are with the white paper, potentially county devolution and all these things, to wait till the summer would be too long. We might not have all the answers in, but a much earlier meeting when something is set out, to at least set out what we're going to be discussed and what the implications might be, I think would be a great advantage, and very much support if Tony suggested do that he leads that group again. I very much support that. Thanks.
I think that's a given. As soon as the board, should it approve it, we'll get on with that. And who chairs it will, of course, be a decision for the group when you're pulled together. But I certainly totally support Tony doing what he did last time. Whether that's the conclusion next time is entirely up to you folks. I've still got 3 hands up, but I'm sure they're all legacy. That's Martin, Alan, and Rob. Are there any other questions or comments on this item? Well, I think rather than read all of the recommendations out again, there they are. Look, you've got them for you, and there's a few more behind that. Are we happy? Oh, sorry, Rupert. I'll go Dan and then Rupert. Dan.
Hi there, Keith. Yeah, I just wanted to check on one point in regards to 3.15, and we've said that the TFSE will be taking kind of leadership role for the work on future mobility and for freight. And I just wanted to double check that, I mean, for instance, in one of those areas, mobility as a service, we sort of progressed an internal scheme quite a long way at Kent County Council, and I'm sure some of the other authorities on this call have done likewise. And just wanted to check you were aware of what, if you like, the internal capabilities and status on some of these projects might be in the member authorities for freight and for mobility, where perhaps you're going to do a bit more, and just check we are kind of coordinating on that and not reinventing the wheel, as it were.
I would be very surprised if we aren't aware of it then, but I'm sure Rupert. Mark's got his hand up. Mark, did you want to respond to that one, or is that something else?
Yes, just to provide the reassurance that yes, we're doing exactly as was asked, keeping in touch with ongoing developments in our constituent authorities on mobility as a service to make sure that anything we do is adding value, not duplicating.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think just because those schemes, for the time being, are relatively localised because of the subject matter, particularly with mobility as a service, less so with freight. I think probably authorities have done a little bit more than that, but that's fantastic if you're staying in touch. I'm sure we have gaps that you can really help us with, and likewise, it might be that some areas we've done some good thinking, which is helpful to share with TFSE. Thank you.
That's really helpful, because we're very clear we really don't want to be doing what is the responsibility of local transport bodies. We do want to be adding value, not and certainly not getting in anybody's way. So that hopefully give you that reassurance. Rupert.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. What I was going to say was that we will bring forward an early meeting of the Governance Committee, and if members are so minded, then we'll go to the grouping that was established when we held this one before. So that's Councillor Page, Councillor Humby. It was Brighton and Hove rep, so Councillor Healy, Brighton and Hove were on that, and Dan, I think it was a KCC member. It was your predecessor. So if members are happy with that, we will put in place an invite. Oh, and Jeff, I think you were involved as well, from memory. And Dan Ruiz, I think, is offered to represent the LEP. So if you're content with that, we'll proceed on that basis.
More than happy. If anybody has a burning desire to be on there, then please let the team know. It was a really useful group last time. It made done some really good work outside of the board meetings, and so I think it's a really good thing to have in place. So if we're happy to add that as the way forward, shall we agree all of the 5 recommendations as printed.
Great.
Thank you.
Great.
So now we'll move on to agenda item 6, which is the freight, logistics and international gateway strategy. And Mark, I think you're going to introduce, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm going to hand over in a moment to Chris Douglas from WSP, who's going to give us a brief presentation of the content of the strategy, but just a few introductory comments. Obviously, the reason why we've developed this particular work stream, recognition of the vital role that freight plays in the transport system and in meeting the needs of our local economy, but recognising that we need a much better understanding of the way the freight sector works so that we can ensure that as far as possible we're helping it to be managed in a way that will deliver on our 2050 vision set out in the transport strategy, but also addressing some of the issues that the freight sector has about the way that the public sector tends to address freight. So very much trying to fill those gaps. So there's a number of key challenges that the freight strategy is seeking to address: the lack of data that we have about how the freight sector operates, the skill shortages that we've heard very much about the lorry driver shortage, and this whole issue of freight blindness that in the public sector we're obviously accused of, about not giving freight its due. And key needs to develop some supporting infrastructure, particularly the issue of intermodal freight exchange, the ability to move freight from road to rail particularly, and also the big issue about decarbonisation. Given the scale of the freight traffic on our roads and our commitment to meet the government target of reaching net zero by 2050, an awful lot of work to be done in helping the freight sector to decarbonise. So since our inception, we've, as TFSE, we've been undertaking some freight work. We did some work specifically to help us with the development of the transport strategy. And obviously the freight strategy document that we're looking at today is a culmination of what we've done so far. So what I want to do now is to hand over to Chris Douglas from WSP, who with Steer have helped us develop the freight strategy. So over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Mark. I'll just share my screen, get the slides up. If you just bear with me a second. Hopefully you can all see that okay. Yeah, you just get a nod to say yes, yeah. Okay, very quick thank you just for the invitation to present on the freight logistics and gateway strategy to you today. Very pleased to be able to deliver this work on behalf of TFSE. So there we go. Just a quick reminder in terms of where the freight logistics and gateway strategy sits. So it acts as one of the studies that really creates the bridge between the main transport strategy and the SIP. So it's the sister strategy really to the future mobility strategy, and then the various geographically specific area studies as well. I think it's worth saying that the work that we undertook, so WSP in partnership with Steer and Future City Logistics undertook in 2021, was supported by previous work as well undertaken in 2019 with a fact-finding logistics and gateway review, and also was then informed by work that was undertaken in 2020, which was a scoping study looking at what should be within the freight strategy, and that included an awful lot of quite detailed stakeholder engagement and stakeholder consultation. So I think it's really the key point is just to stress that there's been a lot of background research work which has been done to feed into the strategy development. The main building blocks for the strategy comprise a set of core stakeholder engagement and technical work packages. As I said, but for something as comprehensive as this and as important as this, there had to be really detailed stakeholder engagement throughout the entire process, and a lot of quite very technical, detailed research undertaken across different sectors, across the different modes, both from the public and private sector perspectives as well. So those are really the building blocks that I'm just going to walk you through shortly. Work package 1, so stakeholder engagement. As I said, there's been a lot of that during the course of the strategy development. There's 2 groups that really informed the development of the strategy. The first was the freight steering group, smaller group, really quite focused on the project to develop the strategy, drawing representatives from across the public and private sectors and also across different modes, as well as academia, and bringing in trade associations and real world operators as well. The role of that freight steering group was to inform the development of the strategy and its supporting action plan. The second body that was set up was the Freight Forum. So the Freight Forum met 3 times during the course of the development of the strategy. This was a much wider interest group, so around about 70 members. It did include the members of the Freight Steering Group as well as other representatives as well. So it brought in real world operators again, local authorities, DFT, the network managers across modes, and academia as well. So it was trying to bring together various different stakeholder parties to really discuss in detail what the issues were, identify what the themes are in terms of what the strategy should cover to try to improve efficiency, safety and sustainability of freight transport across the TFSE area. We'll come back onto the Freight Forum just at the end of the presentation as well, because it's potentially an extremely powerful organisation. Work package 2 was about reviewing baseline freight data and also looking at research and future insight. There is very much a shortage of good quality, accurate, up-to-date freight data. Freight data is very much the poor relation compared to the movement of people and passengers. So we mapped out where the current situation is, where freight data can be sourced, and also identify where the gaps are and what needs to be done to try to improve the quality of freight data to help inform decision making. Good quality informs decision making very much dependent on having decent data that really presents a picture in terms of what happens on the movement of freight across modes. Work package 2 also took a look at trends, the impact of Brexit, the driver shortage that came up in Mark's introduction there as well, and also the role of online purchasing, online shopping, the impact of e-commerce, the changing role of the high street, and so on. And we also took a look within that work package at a range of different scenarios. So what happens in longer term impact of COVID-19, changes to global shipping, which have come as a result of COVID-19 internationally, looking at further van growth, where there's been really significant increase in the number of van registrations over the last decade to service the needs, not just of online retail, but also increased construction activity. And then understand what is a sustainable road to growth that balances not just the needs of business, but the needs of local communities as well as industry itself. And a key output from that work package was what we call a pathway to better data from better sources. So rather than relying on quite old data collection methodologies and lots of guesstimates and estimates, it's all about trying to find much better access to better quality data from real world operators working in partnership with the industry to try to access that data. Work package 3, infrastructure, focusing on freight specific interventions to trying to make sure that the industry it has access to a good, effective, efficient networks, and that covered rail. So across all modes, rail in terms of network enhancements, electrification, and use of alternative fuels for the movement of rail freight. On road, one key area particularly relevant to the TFSE situation is truck parking provision, making sure that there is sufficient overnight parking in suitable locations to be able to not just provide for operators today, but also it is a key stumbling block to bringing new entrants to the industry. So that the driver shortage is partly linked to just the quality of life of an HGV driver, for example, and the time that they spend away from home traveling the network. International gateways, including freight access to ports and airports, and what future plans need to be able to accommodate that from a freight perspective. And we also looked to inland waterway and potential and the role of coastal shipping moving forward, as well as, very importantly for the TFSE area, logistics, land and property provision, the needs of industry in terms of its sheds and distribution centres, making sure that they're close enough to their big markets so that trip generation is minimised. Work package 4, technology and decarbonisation. huge important issue moving forward. So a policy review looking at, for example, DfT's Transport Decarbonisation Plan, understanding what that really means for freight transport across all modes, understanding what industry has to do to reach its targets and the stepping stones that it needs to go through, looking at technology types and what types of technology can help industry achieve those decarbonisation targets. So we've looked at things like vehicle booking systems, drones, droids, dynamic curb space management, and many others. So it's a lot of future technologies that could potentially play a role in trying to understand exactly how they can support industry to achieve their decarbonisation objectives, and also look at a living lab approach within the TFSE area to really trial technology use, implement and test and pilot different technology types to see what impact they have. Work Package 5 focused on operational planning considerations. This is best summarised as saying, what is it that industry needs to do in the future, and what is it that the public sector can do to help industry achieve its objectives by creating the best possible operating environment. Industry and public sector need to work in partnership, so in collaboration, to be able to achieve joint objectives. And so what we've done with that was identify a whole range of different interventions that range from load sharing, quiet deliveries outside of peak periods, looking at the potential for alternative mode use, and also the role of consolidation centres and micro consolidation centres in urban areas. So there's a whole package of different dashboards that we considered there as well. The strategy document itself, in terms of structure, moved from the very beginning in terms of setting the context within the TFSE area, what's particular and what's specific what particular needs are there within the TFSE area for more sustainable and efficient freight movement. We stated very clearly then what the vision and objectives were. So this links back to the main transport strategy, because obviously there has to be that clear link, that silver thread back to the main transport strategy document. So the vision by 2040 of the South East having a more efficient, sustainable and safer logistics sector to support sustainable economic growth with significantly reduced impacts on communities and the environment. That's the overall vision for the work that was undertaken. All of that was then supported by an evidence base. So as I said, there was a lot of technical research for each one of those work packages, which has gone into the development of the strategy document. So we think that it's sound outputs from each of the technical work packages that then inform the development of the strategy itself. And then a set of strategic actions which have been developed in response to all the themes and issues that were brought out during extensive stakeholder engagement and consultation. The strategic actions, which we'll come on to in a minute, really are the ways of addressing those themes and issues that were raised. The strategy component itself within the strategy document outlines what it's the overarching framework and what needs to be done within the defined timescales. And then we have a delivery plan. So the delivery plan is 30 plus pages of more than 40 individual measures designed to deliver the strategic actions, essentially the on the ground practical measures that can be introduced to deliver the overall work. The objectives mentioned, they come under three main categories linking back to the main transport strategy. So economic, social and environmental. Economic, improving efficiency, making the sector more robust in terms of employment, improving connectivity, making it safer, integrating freight transport thinking into placemaking activity in the planning and policy process right from the very beginning rather than just an afterthought, and then delivering on its environmental objectives, reducing the impact on the environment as well as the impact on local communities. There's a group of 14 strategic actions. I'll not go through all of them, but they range right across the spectrum from what industry needs to do over in the left-hand column there, improving its perceptions of it, sharing best practice and improving efficiency and safety, right the way through to the role and influences of others, including the public sector. So if you look at the two that I've highlighted on the right-hand side, increasing public sector understanding of the industry is a really key theme that came out from all of the consultation work that we did, and also getting better local freight and logistics planning, building the requirements of the freight industry into the planning and policy processes right from the very outset, linked into improving and increasing the level of understanding of why industry works in the way that it does and why it needs to be supported by public sector strategy development. So remoting to cleaner alternatives is one of those strategic actions that we flagged there. This is one example measure from the remoting to cleaner alternatives category. As I said, there are multiple measures for each one of those strategic actions, but to give you a feel for how we presented this in the action plan document, so the individual measures, we talk about what priority those could have, what the first actions need to be and what the process is to introduce them. This one is about researching and promoting best practice of zero emission vehicles, what the outcomes are in terms of what we would expect, the impact of that measure to be, indicators, so the measures really against which we will assess success, what the benefits will be from that particular measure, what are the expected timescales for development and delivery will be, the likely capex costs and revenue costs for that measure, very importantly, who the delivery partners are, so who's the lead organisation responsible for delivering that measure, because it doesn't always have to be TFSE, it needs to be TFSE working in partnership with a range of different stakeholders, and making sure that the right organisations are there performing a support role with TFSE. In many cases, it's other organisations having to take the lead on those tasks as well. Assessing the risk of that particular measure, what's associated with it, and how those risks can then be mitigated to maximise or optimise likely success. And then explaining from a synergy point of view how that particular measure then links into other measures as a package, and whether the final column is piloting, whether or not piloting is required within a trial location within the TFSE area. So that's really the structure of each of the individual measures within the action plan. As I said, there's 30 pages of an action plan with more than 40 individual measures contained within it to help delivery at a practical, tactical level. I did say at the beginning that the FRIT Forum is an important body in delivery of all of this. Ultimately, I guess it's the DFT funding allocation which will determine exactly what can be done in terms of delivery on the action plan. But the FRIT Forum is the key vehicle for delivering the work that we've recommended. So the projects, the individual projects, individual measures really fall under the remit of a FRIT Forum that's got that public sector, private sector partnership working and representation from across the board on sectors and different modes. What we've proposed is that the FRIT Forum, which is established already, that it continues, but that it also then focuses not just as a collective group of 70 plus organisations talking at a high level, that it really goes down into the detail and creates individual working groups responsible for delivering the measures that we've presented there. So a public sector officer working group working in partnership with industry, as well as truck parking as a specialist working group area. So I think the FRIT Forum really is an extremely important body moving forward. Mark, can I just hand back to you now that we covered the technical content?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks very much to Chris. Thank you. Just to say a big thank you to Chris from WSP and Steer and Future City Logistics and their work in putting together what is a very comprehensive and thorough piece of work. Just to, in terms of just closing, just to emphasise that the draft that's before you, we did go through an engagement exercise in November with consultation with a number of key stakeholders, just to give them the opportunity to review the draft through the FRIT Forum and through our Transport Strategy Working Group. We also presented the draft strategy to the Department for Transport, where it was very well received in terms of its alignment with the emerging work that the DFT have going on the production of a national freight strategy. As Chris has emphasised, the strategy does have a very comprehensive action plan. We're anxious to obviously start work in terms of driving that forward, but again, this is all very much dependent upon the level of resources that we get through the comprehensive spending review to enable us to move forward at pace with the delivery of that action plan. And just to say that subject to sort of any further comments coming through the board meeting today, a copy of the strategy will be made available on the website as soon as possible, but we are looking to a sort of a launch event, which we're looking to coordinate through the ITT hub event that's scheduled for May at Farnborough. So that will be an opportunity to showcase the strategy and have a session involving a number of presentations from other people working in the freight structure. So there we are. that's the strategy. Happy to take any comments or questions that anybody has.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Mark. I mean, truly is a comprehensive report, as you say, and I guess the next bit will come about getting the funding to enable us to move it on at pace. So we'll continue to work on that. Are there any questions or comments for Chris or Mark? No hands rushing up. No? Tony?
Just a quick one, conscious of the time, a very comprehensive document. As a lot of this obviously relates to the rail industry, reference is made to work that Network Rail has done, but we need to ensure that there is full buy-in and support from Network Rail, and I'm not really too clear where that sits, and particularly with the changes to it and the whatever it's called, Great British Railways, and all the high-level stuff around that, and the lack of detailed clarity around that organisation. We're going to have to be doubly vigilant to ensure that none of this valuable work is lost and is reflected within the whatever empire emerges from Network Rail and the DFT. I mean, bearing in mind that this is being put together effectively, we're renationalising the railways. The DFT will presumably be looking to play more of a part, but without having a debate about that, I suppose the key point is to ensure that Network Rail and successor bodies are on board with this, and do we have any feel for that at the present time?
Mark, thank you.
To date, we've had a very effective working relationship with officials at Network Rail, and obviously we are working as hard as we can to make sure through the Great British Rail's transition team that continues. So we still have that very open channel, shall we say, to enable us to discuss our emerging proposals and see how they align with their own. So yes, very keen to make sure that we maintain the very effective existing relationship into their new arrangements.
Thank you. Stuart?
It would be remiss to me sit on the call quietly and not apologise on behalf of John Halsall's behalf that he's not here today. So obviously Network Rail is very committed to its relationship with TFSE. I'm the Director of Regional Planning for the Southern Region of Network Rail, and sitting here today. John is a shadow member of the board for that reason, in reflection of our commitment to it. And I'd echo Mark's comments that we have worked very closely between my team and TFSE in developing this freight work, and they have supported us similarly in some of the work we're doing. That has been fed into initial scoping done by Great British Rail's transition team, which is starting to look at wider national strategies. And there's a paper later on in the pack, isn't there, looking at an initial response for a call for evidence. I'm wholly in agreement with the need to make sure that we hold on to the importance of freight within the South and make sure it's reflected in GBR's planning as it starts to develop itself into an organisation going forward, which is currently separate to Network Rail, and Network Rail will be subsumed into it as the infrastructure operator. How that relates to planning will be defined as GBR establishes itself.
Stuart, thank you very much for that, and thank you for attending today. That's really good. There's no other comments or questions. We are asked, as it says there, to agree the draft Trade and Logistics and Gateway strategy. Are we happy to do that? No objections. Thank you very much. Well done. So we move on now to agenda item 7, which is the lead officer's report. Rupert?
Thanks, Chairman. A few swift bits. We've touched upon the levelling up white paper. Clearly, all of us, not just from a Transport for the South East perspective, are interested to see what's contained within there. We're expecting a local authority toolkit around decarbonisation and future of transport for rural connectivity. So the rural strategy there we're expecting sometime later this year. Just to reassure you that we're working with our 6 other subnational transport bodies, and the chief officers of those STBs come together regularly, and are soon to have a meeting with the Director General at the DFT, just picking up issues of shared importance with her. And then finally, just to, you've done it already, Chair, but it's to welcome Emily Bailey, who's covering for Jasmine as Jasmine goes off on maternity. Thank you.
Any questions for Rupert? None. So we are recommended to note the activities of Transport for the South East between October and January 2022. So we go on to agenda item 8, which is the financial update. And you will have seen the note that I sent round recently with regards to the additional funding that have been granted by DFT. I just remind you, 300,000 to the capacity and capability, 100 to electric vehicle charging, 100 to decarbonisation, and that's working between Economic Heartland and Transport East, and Bus Back Better again was split between us and Transport Economic Heartland and Transport for East. So another major step forward, and I hope that the work that the team put in and the work that DFT are seeing that we're doing is part of the reason that we've been so fortunate in getting that. So Andy, would you like to add anything?
Thanks, Councillor Glazier. It's great to see everybody again. It's a long time since I looked after this patch. I'm now looking after it again temporarily for a period. We'll see how long. But what's been really clear to me in catching up with Rupert and the team over the last couple of weeks as I get up to speed is the amount of brilliant work Transport for the South East has done, how far you've moved with the strategy and the SIP. And all of the area studies as well is really brilliant. So yeah, good news that we managed to get you the in-year funding out of the door. That is a testament to the regard in which you are held in DFT in terms of the work that the SDP is doing. We're working hard through the business planning process, which is a civil service euphemism for the divvying up of spending review money for those things that don't get a mention in the budget, and hope to get you that allocation, that longer term allocation, agreed soon, because we know it's important to allow all of you as STBs to plan over the longer term, which is a point I've heard loud and clear throughout the call this morning.
Thank you, Andy, and again, good to see you again. Thank you. Rachel, do you want to pick up on the rest of the finance bit, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll just give a quick update on the rest of the paper, if that's okay. So the paper presents the Q3 update for the budget and picks up on the additional in-year funding that's just been mentioned. It also asks board members to consider the local contributions for the next financial year and the outline structures of the annual report and business plans. In terms of the end of Q3 update, Appendix 1 sets out our year-to-date position against the forecasts. Expenditure to date is 1.3 million, and the majority of that has been on staff and costs and on the technical programme. Just a note as well to say that the budget has been updated to include the recently awarded additional funding, so you will see some additional lines in the budget this month to set that out. And I will cover that in a bit more detail later in the paper. The forecasts show that there's a considerable amount to be spent between now and the end of March, and we're going to continually review this in the coming months, and we will update to the board at their March meeting. We're currently forecasting that around about £870,000 of technical spend will be carried forward, but the good news is the majority of that is committed to existing work streams such as the SIP and the additional in-year funding streams. The second part of the report just highlights our comprehensive spending review bid for multi-year funding, and as we've just heard, we are still waiting to hear on that, and we will keep board members updated on that. The additional in-year funding, I'm really pleased to say that TFSE submitted a bid for £500,000 and we've actually been awarded 600. So we actually got more than we bid for, which is really positive. As you'll see, we have bid jointly on some of the work streams with Transport East and Economic Heartlands. So that means that there's been a little quirk in the grant agreement where we've actually received £700,000, and that's because we're taking a lead role on the Bus Back Better work strand. So we actually are holding some of the money on behalf of Transport East and Economic Heartlands. So in the budget, you will see that we have 700,000, but actually 600,000 of that belongs to TFSE. The paper sets out some high-level details of the four work streams, and TFSE officers are now in the process of meeting with the DFT policy leads to develop the further proposals and start the procurement processes. Just a sort of reminder of what those funding streams are. We have £100,000 for an EV charging infrastructure strategy across the region. £300,000 was awarded for local capacity and capability, and we'll be developing the plans for that. Bus Back Better, we've been awarded £300,000 jointly with EEH and Transport East, so 100,000 of that is for TFSE. And the decarbonisation bid was also for £300,000, and we bid for that jointly with Transport East and Economic Heartlands. £100,000 of that was for TFSE. Economic Heartlands are the lead authority for that piece of work, so they hold the budget for that piece of work. There was a couple of additional areas where we put in smaller bids jointly with other STBs. So on decarbonisation, there was a £70,000 joint STB bid across all 7 STBs, £10,000 of which for TFSE, and that piece of work's been led by Midlands Connect. And the final area that we submitted a joint bid was for the Common Analytical Framework, which fell under local capacity and capability. We understand that that bid has been unsuccessful, but we are waiting for feedback on why that has been the case. On the additional in-year funding, because of the fact that we do have to move quickly on the work stream, so in the grant agreement it says that DFT would like to see us to move to allocate that funding and commit that funding as soon as possible. We are proposing that delegated authority for the procurement process be given to the lead officer in consultation with the chair to allow us to start to move forward on those 4 pieces of work and then report back to the board in March. The report also sets out around local contributions, and local transport authorities have contributed to TFSE's core costs since 2017, and this incredibly important funding stream has allowed TFSE to employ a small staffing complement. We recognise that this has been in the context of an increasingly difficult financial environment for local authorities, and we're very grateful for the local authority support that we've received so far. DFT have been keen that we do continue to secure local contributions, and we're proposing to board members that we continue with a further year of local contributions for the next financial year, which amounts to £58,000 for a county area and the Berkshire Local Transport Body, and £30,000 for unitary authorities. And then finally in the report, it does set out that we've started work on the business plan and annual report, which we're hoping to bring to the board meeting in March. For sign-off, we have attached Appendix 3 and 4 to include outline structures, and we'd welcome any feedback from board members. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Is there any questions or comments on the finance generally? None? Okay, well, we are asked to, we've got 5 there. Where are we going? There we go. 5 recommendations. Note the current financial position. Note the position of funding decisions of the Department of Transport. Note the funding decision for the additional Department of Transport STB work streams, and agree to delegate the authority to the lead officer in consultation with the chair to progress the procurement exercises for these areas. Agree the local contributions for 22-23, and note that the work will be commencing on the business plan and annual report for 22-23. Are we all happy to do that? No objections? Thank you. So we come on to agenda item 9, which is the area studies progress update. Sarah, I think you're going to lead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the purpose of this report is to provide board members with an update on the progress made with the area studies. I'll obviously keep this update brief. There's detail in the report, and obviously we've had a lot of discussion over the last couple of weeks or so with board members individually. So hopefully, as everyone is relatively up to speed with where we are. In terms of where we are, there's a diagram attached to the end of the appendices showing where all the studies are, but all 5 of them are now entering the final phases of the technical work. Very much looking forward to writing up the results and heading towards the strategic investment plan. And on that, we have just amended the methodology as to how that final phase will get reported. Just stress that all the technical work will still go ahead as planned. It's just being reported in a more streamlined way to feed into the strategic investment plan when that comes along. And there's also a diagram that shows how that is now intended to work. In terms of stakeholder engagement, we are, as we've been saying, I'm very, very grateful for the input from everybody's technical officers in helping us undertake the work. And we've just completed a round of engagement with board members individually and at a meeting earlier this morning where board members were able to discuss. In terms of the wider stakeholder engagement, because of the rescheduling of the last stage of work in writing it up, we've slightly changed and instead of having one forum for each individual study, we're now having a wider stakeholder forum collectively for all 5 studies, which is due to take place on the 3rd of March. I think that's probably enough given that the focus has been on the area studies recently, but I'm obviously happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Any questions on the area studies? Comments? No. Again, I just think the feedback sessions have been extremely useful, and as I said then, and continue to say, the team are there to continue to take any points of view. So don't hang about for the next board. If you've got anything, then contact the team. So we are asked to note the progress made with the work on the area studies. Are we all happy to do that? Mm-hmm. No objections. Thank you. Thank you again, Sarah. We come on to agenda item 10, which is the strategic investment plan progress update. Again, no, it's Rachel going to introduce this, please.
Thank you, Chair. This paper is a short update on the progress with the strategic investment plan. And at the last board meeting, we'd undertaken a procurement exercise, but we were in the standstill period and unable to announce the successful bidder at that time. As you're all aware, since that point, we have appointed Steer and KPMG to lead the work. Section 3 of the board report outlines at very high level the approach that Steer and KPMG are planning to take, and in paragraph 3.4 you can see that there's a 5-stage approach to developing the SIP. We have concluded stage A, which is mobilisation, and we've moved into stage B, which is the SIP background, and starting the sort of scoping exercise to review all of the existing technical work which has gone on so far, and the items which feed into that are the TFSE future roles and responsibilities, which has already been discussed, and a number of other background papers. One of the key sections is going to be stage C on SIP development, which is going to focus on the development of the narrative, the strategic narrative, and bringing that together with the outputs of the area studies. That's something that we will be working to develop in more detail, and we have invited Steer to come along to the board meeting in March to provide more feedback on that and explain how board members will be getting involved in that important stage. Stage D is the consultation, which is a 12-week public consultation, and we have gone now to appoint a consultation expert to support us on that exercise, and that's recognising the importance of having a good consultation that members of the public and key stakeholders can get involved with. And also to support the engagement process across that 12 weeks and make sure that we are reaching out to as many key audiences as possible. The purpose of the consultation will be digital first, so we're looking to sort of make sure that we have a proper digital consultation platform, and also that that expert, the consultation specialist, will be able to undertake analysis of the results. We went out to procurement through an RFQ, and we did complete that process last week, and I'm pleased to announce that we have appointed a company called Forestville to lead on that work. They will be working closely with Steer and KPMG to develop that approach and make sure that we receive the results in a timely manner to enable the draft SIP to be updated for the board meeting in November 2022. In terms of the budget implications for this work, the contract value for the SIP is 150,000, and that budget has been allocated from the DFT grant from 21-22 and is included in the budget. And the contract value for the engagement specialist we anticipate being between 25 to 30,000. That is slightly higher than anticipated in the initial budget that we put together, but we are, because the scope of the exercise has changed and we are expecting quite a large response to the consultation, we thought it was better to increase the scope of the budget for that work slightly. The additional budget for that will be met through the underspend through the communications and engagement budget. And that concludes the report, and I'm very happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? I have to say that the papers are well written and the introduction is well written, so we're going well this morning. So we are asked to note the outcome of the procurement exercise, to note the progress on the procurement exercise to appoint the consultation specialists, and to note progress with the strategic investment plan to date. We're all happy to do that. Good. Thank you very much. So we now come on to agenda item 11, which is the technical programme progress update. Mark, are you going to introduce, please?
Yes, just very briefly, the purpose of this report is just to give an update on 3 areas of work which are in progress. So we'll have more to say at the March meeting. The 3 items are on Bus Back Better, producing a regional evidence base that better sets out the ambition for buses moving forward out to 2050. On the future mobility strategy work, looking to mobilise a supplier to help us with the implementation of the action plan. And on the decarbonisation area, we have a specific piece of work looking to identify some transport decarbonisation pathways for the TFSE area and also our constituent authorities. All those pieces of work underway. Like I said, we'd have more to say in terms of outcomes at the March board meeting. Happy to take any questions that anyone may have on progress to date.
Questions or comments? None. Well done. So, Philip.
Thank you, Keith. I just wondered, in view of the most recent information on the funding that seems to have been reduced from about 3.2, 3.4 or 1.5 billion, already oversubscribed at 7 billion. If any of this is being taken into account.
We're talking about the national pot now. Rupert, Mark, does anyone want
to? Is that in relation to bus service improvement plans?
Sorry, yes, it is. Yeah.
So local transport authorities will have received a letter from the department just saying that the overall aspiration of 79 LTAs is quite significant, and just saying that there will probably have to be some prioritisation decisions made in allocation of funding. And it's also adjusted the timescales by which local transport bodies have to submit enhanced partnership paperwork. So I think the bottom line is there's less money, there's not enough money to meet the aspiration of the local transport authorities. So the department's going to consider how they do that. And I presume that the delay to the enhanced partnership gives a bit more time to understand how best to make those prioritisations. But Andy from DFT might wish to add something on what I said.
Andy, anything you want to add?
I think that Rupert is essentially it. So yes, there isn't as much money available as there might have been. So we are looking quite carefully at how we spread that money around and prioritise that money, and easing the timescales, I think, actually was an ambitious timescale anyway, so probably helps in that regard.
Okay. No other comments? So we're happy to agree as printed, rather than me just read them out. You've got them on the screen there. Okay. Thanks for that, Mark and Andy. So we come on to the MRN stroke LMN update, and Sarah, I think that's for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the purpose of this report is to provide board members with an update on progress with MRN and LM schemes within the TFSE area. And since the last board meeting, there have been 2 further announcements around 2 of our schemes. Sorry, I'm just trying to get the right document up. So in October, the DfT announced that the Bognor Regis to Littlehampton scheme in West Sussex had been approved to progress to the next stage of development. It was also announced that in order to help that development, the department would make a contribution of £849,000 towards the costs of developing an outline business case. Similarly, in December, DfT also announced that the A28 Birchington-Accoln Westgate-on-Sea Relief Road scheme in Kent had also been approved to progress to the next stage of development, and also that they would receive a contribution of £750,000 towards the cost of developing their outline business case. So whilst this isn't actually money at the moment to construct the particular schemes, the announcements are obviously to be welcomed, but very much also welcoming the fact that there is development funding there. This is an issue that TFSE have raised with DfT on a number of occasions around the difficulties that our local transport authorities face in having to allocate funding, which there's a big call on funding for a number of things, schools, adult social care, but authorities need to commit funding to develop schemes with no guarantee of final funding, so that the announcement of development funding from the department to help that process is very much welcomed. That concludes the information that's in the report, but I do need to make the board aware that since the report pack was published, TFSE have received a letter from the Department of Transport in regards to the Major Road Network and Large Local Major Scheme Programme. And if you'll just indulge me, I'll just read out the paragraph so members are aware. It says, as with many areas, the spending review has challenged ministers to make choices and to focus on key departmental priorities. As a result, it is likely that we will not have sufficient funding to continue to fund all the schemes currently in the programme to the current scale or timing. In addition, since the programme was set up in 2019, there have been changes to government policy around transport investment, analytical requirements, especially on carbon impacts, the impact of new forecasts, and of course the effects of COVID on delivery and future demand. It is therefore right that we now take the opportunity to review the programme. I'm writing to all subnational transport bodies to seek your help in undertaking this review. So the letter then goes on to provide a lot more detail around obviously the key government priorities, the objectives of the Major Road Network scheme, but essentially it's asking all STBs to review the programme that was submitted in 2019 in light of current status of all the schemes. I have a meeting this afternoon with department officials to understand further what their expectations are and what exactly they want from us. And I have contacted all of our scheme promoters who have actually received a very similar letter individually themselves anyway. So we will work out what it is we need to do and coordinate that effort. And obviously, if there are any changes, therefore, to the priority of schemes, that will come back to the board at a future meeting.
Thank you. And any comments, questions? No. So there we are. We are recommended to note the 2 TFSE major road network schemes that were at strategic outline business case and have been granted approval to proceed to the next stage of development, and both have received confirmation of development funding from DfT towards the cost of developing the outline business case, which I think again is good news, and we must keep that coming. No comments? Thank you. So we now come on to comms and stakeholder engagement update, and Holly, I think it's over to you.
Thank you. Yes, so the purpose of the report today is just to give an update on communication and engagement activities since the last board meeting. As you have already heard today from Sarah and from Mark, there has been a lot of engagement activity happening over the last few months around the freight logistics and the international gateway strategy, and of course around the area studies as well. So there have been 2 lots of engagement sessions now held with board members and chaired by Councillor Glazier. They've also been attended by the technical team by our technical team and representatives from Steer to give updates on the emerging outputs of the area studies and looking at the packages of interventions that will feed into the SIP. And of course, we also held an additional board roundtable this morning before this meeting. You've also heard from Sarah that the joint stakeholder forum has been scheduled for the 3rd of March, which replaces the originally proposed 3rd and final stakeholder forums for each area study. And Rachel has also updated you that we have now appointed an engagement specialist to support the SIP consultation work. So we'll be working closely with them over the next few months. We have further developed our stakeholder engagement and communications plan for the SIP work programme, and a summary of this is included as Appendix 1. So we would ask that board members have a look at the updates to that and agree those. We've also been continuing to broaden our engagement to make sure that we are engaging with a variety of sectors and making sure that we're bringing lots of people together to talk about the work that we're doing. We've had the University Stakeholder Group meet in November 2021, where discussion was focused around the Transport Decarbonisation Plan and what local authorities are doing to address the variety of decarbonisation commitments. The next meeting of the University Stakeholder Group will focus on the impacts of COVID-19 on university staff and students' travel behaviour. As always, board members are welcome and encouraged to attend this interesting forum if they would like to. The next meeting will be on the 2nd of March. The private sector stakeholder group also met in November, and private sector partners continue to be actively engaged with and supportive of the work of TFSE. This is particularly important as we move towards publication of the SIP. We've also had a further meeting of the Communications and Stakeholder Engagement Group, and we have another meeting coming up next week. And we have shared a briefing note with all partners, all Communications and Stakeholder Engagement Group members, so that anybody who was unable to attend has had the same briefing. And we'll be doing a lot of work to make sure that we are sharing details of what we're doing with those partners, so that it can be shared within their own internal and external newsletters, so that we keep supplying key updates for them as we work towards the SIP. The next meeting will be, it says the 31st of January in here, but actually it is the 3rd of February, sorry about that. As we move forward with development of the SIP and work towards public consultation, we're really keen to involve board members more in our communications activity. We'll be considering how best to do this, and we'd really welcome your input. And we will also be having a conversation with the Communications and Engagement Steering Group about this at the next meeting, to see how we can best work together to make sure that we are working with board members through our communications activity as well. So please do let me know if you have any thoughts around how you might like to be involved in that. The Regional Transport Decarbonisation Forum has met 3 times, with the 4th meeting scheduled for March 2022. There continues to be a lot of interest in this group, and membership is continuing to grow. In October of last year, we issued one of our Connections newsletters, and we will also have a further update going out later this week. The last newsletter included updates on the appointment of steering KPMG as consultants on the SIP, the A259 corridor between Bognor Regis and Littlehampton in West Sussex, which Sarah has just mentioned, and also an update on the submission of our spending review for 2021. As I say, there will be another newsletter coming out later this week. We're making plans now to hold virtual briefing sessions with districts and borough authorities later in February, and this will be to update them on emerging outputs from the area studies and the SIP development process. These will be open to council leaders, chief executives and relevant portfolio holders, and that really is just to bring them in line with all of the information that we've shared so far about the SIP process today. TFSE officers have presented at several events and seminars recently, including the Highways UK event, RTPI Decarbonising the Transport Network in the South East, and the Last Mile Conference. There are a number of upcoming events as well, which some of you I know were able to attend. The most recent one, which was an event on delivering economic growth in the context of decarbonisation, which took place earlier this month and was jointly hosted by the Transport Planning Society. We've also got a number of other events coming up later this year, including the ITT Hub, the joint STB conference in May, and our own event in July. With political engagement, we have issued an electronic briefing to all MPs in November, and a reception is scheduled for next week at the House of Commons, and this will be followed by virtual regional engagement sessions, which will take place in the same month. Board members have been invited and are encouraged to join these sessions, as well as the reception at the House of Commons next week. So if you haven't responded, then please do let us know whether you're able to come. And that's it from me.
Thanks, Holly. Quite a lot going on, and it's quite a busy time. So, any questions or comments? I think there are two bits there that are particularly worth considering as we leave. The first is how you want to be engaged in the future. I mean, I'm sure there's some good ideas out there, so don't hesitate in contacting Holly or the team to pass them forward. And secondly, when the presentations come to borough and districts, I'm not sure whether board members or have been invited along to those, but it might be something that we would want to sit in on. So we'll look and see how that goes. Apart from that, again, thank the team and thank Holly. Note the engagement and communications activity has been undertaken since October 21, and note the communication and engagement plan for the SIP development process attached as Appendix 1. Are we happy to do that?
Yep.
No objection? That's great. Okay, thank you. So we come to 14, and that's the Transport Forum update. And Jeff, please.
Thanks very much, Keith. Yeah, I think I'll just remind people, because not all of you might have found your way down to page 221 of the pack. I think so. Just to reinforce the fact the Transport Forum goes on meeting, we actually had a presentation from the Great British Railway Transition Team at the last meeting, which was very interesting, but which seemed to show that they still had quite a long way to go and to develop before there was lots to say. We continually get a reasonable attendance at the Transport Forum meetings, of over 30 at the last one. This is one of the places where doing it on Zoom or on Teams is very good, because whilst everybody wants to have a say, given the size of our area, there's a lot of travelling time for a relatively short meeting time. So having it virtually, as we're having today's board meeting, it's useful, and we keep on. Most of the forum want to keep on having virtual meetings, even if they have the odd meeting, perhaps one a year, where people get together at a central place. I think that it's the challenge always with the forum is to be engaging people, but to engage them at the right level at the right time, and that's a little bit difficult. And certainly we're very conscious. I'm very conscious, and others are very conscious, that as we go through the 2022, it's going to be. We're going to have to be careful to get the presentations to the different groups in the right order, so people aren't hearing things by the back door when there's a better presentation happening in 2 weeks' time or a month's time. So I'm very conscious of that. So that's one issue, liaising with Jasmine, and I presume now with you, Holly, about how the meetings work and mesh with each other. And I think the other thing he said with a nice smile on his face is that it's also interesting to try and make sure the forum doesn't get involved in too much detail too quickly and lose sight of the overall aims and targets of Transport for the South East. But I mean, we can manage that, but you just always have to be on the lookout for it. Otherwise, I'm down looking at I don't know, muddy bus stops or something like that before you can say anything. So keeping the conversations at the right level are a bit of an issue. But it's an interesting challenge. It goes on being an interesting challenge, and we will go on trying to ensure that the topics for the various meetings are dealt with carefully. The next one is due for early March, and it's proceeding.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm sure I have it on good authority that you maintain order at all times. and long may that last.
You've been talking to that Rob Humby again.
No, we very much appreciate the way that you steer it, because it's not an easy task. I know it's board meetings are a doddle compared with what you have to do. So that's good. Thanks again. Any questions or comments for Jeff? I think we're here the point about getting the diaries right and right people hearing at the right time. I think that's an important part that we can pick up on. So yeah. We're happy to thank Jeff and note the recent meeting of the Transport Forum, and any comments I'm sure have now been noted and will be considered. So thank you.
Absolutely.
We're now on to responses to consultation, which we have a few. Rupert, I understand you're going to lead. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. I'll whistle through these. So the first one, the GBR Transition Team Whole Industry Strategic Plan. It's quite a significant response we put back in, or we're proposing to put in. I think it highlights the importance that this will have in terms of rail going forward. And what we've done in the consultation response is look at our objectives. So the Transport for the South East strategic objectives and our priorities, and map those over to the WISP objectives. I think, the focus on passenger expectations and freight, and financial stability, on economic growth, levelling up and sustainability, all key things. And in our response, we've done quite a lot of work with stakeholders over the last few years, so we've got a good understanding of what they want to see, and we're reflecting that. Our future mobility strategy as well. We're also referencing customer satisfaction and integration being key. We don't support material increases in regulated fares, and we also recognise, in terms of that financial sustainability, that understanding of costs and efficiencies and initiatives is quite key. And again, with all of these, we map to the transport strategy. So it's quite comprehensive. I'm grateful to Steer for helping us pull together this, and I think it is quite significant. So that's the first one, Chair. The second one is a future transport regulatory review. And again, linking into our strategic plan, we think that if you're putting in a new regulatory duty, then it needs to be supported by the right funding, understanding about how it's delivered and how it's enforced. So, when you're putting on new duties, you need to think how it's funded. And then simple things within there. So, for example, encouraging non-residential car parks to have charging points. Aspects like that are pretty key. On the third one, Gatwick, we're not offering a review of support or opposition at this stage. Like many authorities surrounding Gatwick, more information is required before we come back and seek a view on whether Transport for the South East support or oppose. That'll probably be around the time the DCO lands. And then Transport East released their strategy, aligns very closely with ours. We're very supportive of it. And then likewise, 2 local transport plan consultations for both West Sussex and Surrey. I won't go into the detail of that, but other than to say they map well to our strategy. And then 2 final ones. One is all-party parliamentary group inquiry on levelling up and what that means, and we've provided some information, a bit of evidence there. And then finally, Officers and Rail Regulator, Road and Rail Regulator, is consultation on the ORR's approach to to road investment strategy. And one of the key points we make there is actually we think it would be useful for them to talk to stakeholders to find out from them what the experience has been like and what they would like to see going forward. So quite a chunky lot of consultations, Chairman, and where we've submitted them, they're officer responses, and we've been clear on that, and that we would get a board endorsement or a board support if that's what the board wished to do, and they're all there for you to consider.
Thank you very much. Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Keith, and thanks, Rupert. Just speaking on two of these. Firstly, the transition, the rail industry, or the Great British Railways submission, an excellent document. I intend plagiarising bits of it for our own authority as well. But that's as we saw earlier, that's partly the purpose of TFSE, to provide a resource for local authorities. So I don't think there's anything to be embarrassed about there, but I do commend the work here. I think it's particularly notable at the present time how we see different TOCs responding to the need to save money. I think we have a slightly more imaginative and responsive approach from Great Western compared with what I would regard as a ham-fisted and incompetent South West Railways change to timetable and severing connectivity. There was publicity on the news on South News last night about the impact of some of those changes. Now, I realise that's not for us necessarily to comment on in this document, but it does beg the question about the need for a much more joined up approach by the DfT and the future railway planners if we're going to deliver on the carbon agenda and get people onto trains. What we've seen with South West Trains seems to be driving people to all alternatives except the trains. The other document, the other submission that I very much welcome is the Gatwick North Runway submission, which rightly pushes back on the very car-based response that we see with the proposals, and the transport and surface access paragraph is very well made, and the lack of ambition in that. That could also be applied to Heathrow. The car-based, if the directors of Heathrow were obliged to come in by public transport rather than having their own private car parking spaces protected, then perhaps they might get with the agenda as well. But the whole debate about airport expansion is for another day. But in terms of the current needs for both Gatwick and Heathrow, as I commented earlier, improved public transport links to both for passengers and staff are well overdue. And the Davis Commission paper, a report on Heathrow, made that point years ago, that Western Rail access and improved access to Gatwick was needed for the airport as it currently is, never mind about an expansion debate. And it's the DfT's wanting to link funding to expansion that has held back improvements, particularly at Heathrow. So I welcome the response on Gatwick, Chair, and I would be interested to know whether we get any response from Gatwick to that, because I take it it's already gone in, and I'm not really too clear what the, perhaps if it's in here, no it isn't, what is the timetable for the next stage and the development consent order? That was the question to Rupert. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll get Rupert to answer that, and I'll come back to two of the other points.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. You know, I don't have the timetable to hand, but the DCO is quite a way off. So they've just consulted on their preliminary environmental, it's PEIR, isn't it? Preliminary environmental something. And I do know that many authorities within the southeast have concerns that the level of information at this stage isn't sufficient enough for them to be able to form a view. So that's issues around noise, decarbonisation and surface transport. When it comes to air policy and aviation policy, we don't have a view. and it's not an area in which we step into. That's very much DFT holding the reins on that, and our issues predominantly around the surface transport implications of it, which, as you say, Tony, we don't think are sufficiently developed at this stage for enable us to form a view.
And that was the point I was going to make, Tony. I mean, we've commented on both Heathrow and Gatwick many times about the need for access for public transport, and so I think we are consistent in that, and hopefully we can all remain dedicated to try and get people off cars and onto buses or trains. Are there any other points on that or any of the other consultations? Because I just think again it's good that we've got the opportunity to comment on these as a collective as well as individuals. So hopefully you'll agree with that as well. Dan, did you want to come in, please?
Yes, I had two questions, if I may. Yeah. One was on Gatwick, and I see that we critiqued what they submitted so far, and a couple of issues we had with it were that not enough kind of detailed analysis and planning have been done in regards to sustainable transport for getting to and from the airport, and for the emissions kind of modelling. So I just wondered if, since we'd written in to Gatwick, they provided anything more on that, because I would agree that they're critical areas. And then the second bit was on the two responses we made to West Sussex and Surrey on their local transport strategy. I have a direct interest in this because I'm just started chairing Kent County Council's new local transport strategy, Keith. So I want to make sure that we do it in the right way, the best way possible. And this is my naivety, I'm sure, and maybe every other person on this call will know the answer. But on both cases, we said something which I wasn't totally sure what it meant. So I thought I would ask, if I may. Yeah. Both of those responses, we had said we welcome the move away from the traditional transport planning approach of planning for vehicles towards a clear focus on planning for people and places. I think in one of our responses, we'd said there hadn't been enough of that in the local transport strategy, and the other one we said, oh, you did lots of that. But what is that kind of paradigm shift that you're referring to? It'd just be helpful to know what we should be doing in that regard.
I'm sure Rupert's just going to explain
it. Yeah, so
don't expect me to.
Firstly, on if I just pick up Gatwick, it's just worth noting that a number of authorities in the southeast are working together collaboratively on their approach to Gatwick. That's mainly in relation to the planning responses when it comes to a DCO. And I think it's fair to say that Gatwick haven't responded to those comments. They use them to develop the information and evidence base so that when they come to submit the DCO and then the formal process starts, that they can use that to hopefully put sufficient information to allow authorities to do a response. And I just cannot, I'm just trying to find just now, I can't quite remember the timescales, but there's still quite a way to go in terms of that. In the local transport plans, historically, we've just planned on vehicle growth increasing sort of incrementally, and said, well, we're going to get X number of thousand vehicles in 5 years' time, therefore let's put another carriageway in or do this piece of work. And what we're saying is, well, you need to move away from that and look at trips that are not necessarily generated by car. So you move away from saying, well, let's just build ourselves out of this by looking in a more integrated way and looking at the opportunities different modes provide you, both in the context of decarbonisation and modal shift, that you start to put the emphasis back onto what happens in a place and what's the connectivity and the offer for connectivity in a particular place. And I think, it's fair to say that as we're seeing local transport plans develop, we recognise that there's a lot of regard to the TFSE transport strategy, which has that emphasis, that move away from the predict and provide, and starts to put that emphasis back in how do you connect places together, and then how do you connect different places, so economic hubs and the like, together in a way that moves you away from just let's build ourselves out of this. I think it's timely and probably overdue. Things like bus service improvement plans and active travel plans and all of that feeds into getting a place functioning in a proper way. And it'll be interesting to see how, for example, the BSIP work plans out. I know Mark's been quite closely involved with some of this and might want to add.
Mark, anything you want to add?
No, I think that was quite a good exposition of a civil engineer trying to be a transport planner there. So nothing really.
Thank you, Rupert, and I understood it, so I appreciate that.
And Dan, I was looking up. I've just got the agenda for the last GAL meeting, and Kent are there, but I'm not sure who represents you on that. I go along. Whether Roger, I haven't seen Roger there, but it might be just worth checking who's on that board for your authority. Or I'll try and find out and text your email here.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic, and then I'll look internally.
Good. Colin.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasise a little bit more on what Rupert said about the transport planning that Dan has just mentioned. And I was involved when I was at Surrey at the start of this. And it's more looking at the logistics of how people move around and where they need to move around. So where are your employment centres, where people live, how do they get between it, where are your health partners, and what are the journeys for health. And breaking it down more into the types of journeys that go on. And that's where you then look at how do you build in the resilience to move forward in those areas, rather than just bunging in extra roads because that particular road is really busy. You can look at, okay, there's a hospital there, so can we put something in the town that stops some of those hospital journeys, rather than just building the roads out. So it's taking it to a more minutiae level and understanding why the journeys happen, not just what journeys are happening.
That's very helpful, Colin. Thanks for that. Any other comments or questions? There is a whole raft of recommendations which I don't intend to read out unless anybody's going to object to them. Then we'll find out which one. But any objections? Nothing showing. So thank you for those, all 7 as printed. So we come on to agenda item 16, which is any other business. This is your opportunity to raise anything that you want explanation on from officers or myself. No? Oh, yeah. Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. It's just picking up a little bit on the last point that Colin made about how do we sort of as a group consider the bigger picture in terms of we all want somewhere nice to live, somewhere nice to work, somewhere nice to play. And somebody mentioned earlier, didn't they, about in terms of the social care and those other issues, and I mentioned this before around mental health issues and the role that we have. How do we as a group consider all that? And that very much, as I linked into what Dan and Colin said, really. If we look at infrastructure and transport, how does that affect the way we live? Because the world has changed. It won't go back to how it was. What it will be, I don't think any of us know. But do we actually stop to consider that? I think when we looked at this before, I said, well, sometimes we need to just stop, take a pause and think what's happening. Even in terms I've talked about technology, the speed of technology, AI, quantum AI, and all these things. How do we take an overall view of that? I know you can't stop because you wouldn't achieve or you wouldn't do anything if you always waited. Even in things like EV charging, we've looked at that and induction charging. I think I said one day we'll have a skip load of cables and plugs one day because it'll all be induction. And I know you have to think about the here and now. I understand that, but it is in terms about the economic growth, the green recovery. How does that pay for all this as well? And it's just do we actually sit back and think about society generally, Keith? That's what I'm interested in, and the impact that this board can have on that.
from my perspective, I'll take the pandemic as a classic example. You know, for the most of last year and the year before, we were saying, have we considered COVID in all of our responses and the like? And of course we did, and we done that special piece of work on it. But I'm sure as we move forward with policy, and I'm talking about national policy now, probably as much as local policy. So we're governed by decarbonisation, we're governed by electric vehicles. We are focusing on that, but the social aspect of what you talk about and the changing circumstances, I think, are reflected in current travel plans and in current journeys. I may be totally wrong, but I would expect the fact that the number of train journeys has dropped off, people are not commuting and like. But equally, car use has gone up because of that. So I think all of that's taken into account. The social aspect of it, I'm not sure how we could account for in this board. But Rupert's going to now tell me why and how.
You might be a bit optimistic there, Keith. I mean, I think what Rob's highlighted is absolutely spot on. And as a board, when we started doing, remember the scenario planning and developing a vision and the direction for the strategy, you probably recall the sort of Venn diagram of the economy, social and environment, and how you wanted to hit the sweet spot. And what Rob said around people wanting a house, a roof over their heads and access to employment, healthcare, green spaces, all of that contributes to that overall well-being. And now how you quantify that, how you put a financial metric on it is more challenging, because it's sort of more of an intangible benefit. And I think the same can be said for decarbonisation. So when we're starting to appraise schemes, I think the world is now, or certainly from a policy sense, it's starting to think about, well, how do you take account of some of those things that have historically been more intangible? How do you put a monetary figure against them, so that you can start to appreciate the value of what you've just described in cost benefit terms? So you draw your investment decisions are driven more by the sort of social and environmental aspects, as well as the connectivity. And the point and Jeff mentioned this, we quite often talk about roads, and people are likely to jump into opposition about roads, but the point for me is they are really, really important transport corridors. What you move along them is up for debate, but they are significantly important corridors that help people with their well-being, their access to employment and healthcare, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, okay, Keith, I may come back. That's really useful, Rupert, from the terms of, we sort of said, haven't we, about doing place planning alongside transport planning, and it's been separate, and now it's joined up, which I think what we've always said, and it needed to be. It wasn't a criticism. I mean, when you think that the progress that Transport for South East has made in a relatively short space of time, and at the end of the day, we're here probably representing what happens, how people live their lives for nearly 10 million people. But it's just taken that step back sometimes to say, actually, and it's a bit like Colin said, when you plan for road, where is the hospitals and all those sorts of things. It's just making sure that we do consider it. I wasn't saying that we don't, but the world has changed now from that point of view. And how people will live their lives is different. I know this is a bit deep and early for sort of a Monday morning, but we do need to do that. It's a bit like thinking, we can plan all this, we think we're doing the right thing, but actually, what do people actually want and how are they going to live? It's just making sure we do consider it. That's all. Thanks, Kate.
And we'll keep considering it, and we'll keep looking forward to you to remind us to keep doing these things. So, so you keep coming. That's really good.
I wouldn't want to upset Jeff and not say anything. That's what I do.
I think you're safe there. Okay. Is there any other business? If not, we will look forward to meeting together again on the 21st of March. It says from 9 till 12 virtually. I'm not sure. Oh, we're going to do a pre-meet or whatever. But anyway, the detail of that I'm sure will follow, and it will be virtual as this morning. So with that, I thank you again. And seriously, what Rob has just said, the amount of work that's being covered in this last period of time is enormous. Along with our partners, we must keep going. At the end of the day, the opportunities are now beginning to grow, so we just need to get out there and take them. So again, thank you all very much for your attendance this morning, and look forward to catching up again soon. Thanks a lot.
Everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.